Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 58 of the Gut Check Project. Ooh, today's a really, really cool one. We have Dr. Sabine Hazan, who will be our very first gastroenterologist as a guest. So I'm a gastroenterologist, but she's way smarter than I am and does all kinds of really cool stuff. I'll read what's that?
Cool stuff, yes.
Cool stuff indeed. It's awesome. So I put together a quick little bio for you. I apologize that I don't have your probably standard bio, so I hope I get some of this stuff right. And you'll notice there's an empty seat here where my co-host, Dr. Eric Rieger, CRNA, who's usually here on time. Don't do that. It'll make it blurry. It'll get us out of focus. He almost photobombed us.
Almost.
Dr. Hazan, this is Eric Rieger.
Hello, Dr. Hazan.
Hi, Eric.
We've already been talking, and we practically had a whole podcast before this podcast.
Yeah, so. You missed it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Another topic that I'd like to talk about is promptness and being on time. That's another thing that really, well, apparently I wasn't very good at today. So I'm really sorry.
You know what's interesting, and I hope it's something that we can comment later, is that Eric got a round of antibiotics, and ever since then, it's so weird. He's just always late for everything, and I'm blaming it on the microbiome.
100%. I think we should test his microbiome. We'll send you a kit. That's the first thing I do.
All right. So Dr. Sabine Hazan is a board-certified gastroenterologist and avid researcher. She has a thriving practice in Ventura, California, and she started her own clinical trial company 16 years ago called Ventura Clinical Trials and has been principal investigator and sub-investigator in over 150 clinical trials. Now, you say that number, but I'm in like 4, and it was exhausting. So 150, holy cow. All right, so during this period, she became an expert in the microbiome with an interest in C. diff, Clostridium difficile. So through this process, she became one of the world's leaders in fecal microbial transplant, and through her research and experience, she realized the unmet need to dive deeper into the microbiome, and she founded ProgenaBiome. So she is the founder of her own company, ProgenaBiome, and most recently, she published a fun, easy-to-read book for the layperson called Let's Talk Shit.
Hey.
And I got it, and I read it, and I laughed a lot. And it's really good, and it's written in a great layperson point of view, and I loved it. So, Dr. Hazan, you want to talk some shit?
Let's talk shit,
Let's
sure.
talk some shit.
Thank God, at least finally a podcast that's like willing to go there. And everybody's like, oh, I don't think we should talk about it, or we should say another word. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Have you seen half the books that are out there? The Art of Not Giving a F-U.
Oh, that's right.
And that's like a #1 bestseller. But let's talk shit. We can't even say the word shit. Since when is the F word more acceptable than the shit? Come on. It's not okay.
This is true. Unfortunately, I think I use the words quite frequently, both of them often. So I really do not discriminate.
I named it that way because too often, we sugarcoat microbiome, right? We made it pretty. But I think we're entering in a world of microbiome. We got to tell the public and the consumer what it's all about. And that's why I wanted it. First of all, I thought it was funny. I mean, this is like a tough topic, right? People come to us as GI doctors, bloated, gassy, symptoms of, bowel changes, etc. And so we have to explain to them. And how do you explain a topic like the microbiome without, a little bit of humor to digest it a little bit better? In my opinion, that's why I named it. So to give it full transparency. And then the other thing was to essentially, make people smile, because there's so many jokes you could say about it.
So. I heard you on another podcast where you're exactly right. As gastroenterologists, we have no problem talking about it, but I have the same issue with patients. They're like, oh, this is so embarrassing. I don't want to discuss this. I'm like, we have to discuss this. And then that goes from that to, okay, well, as long as you're comfortable with it, here's some pictures.
I know. I get that all the time. I'm like, no pictures, please, no
Or
pictures.
sometimes randomly the nurse says they showed up with the bag and they didn't flush it.
Yes. Isn't our field great? I mean, you know, you probably know Neil Stolman, right, Dr. Stolman?
Yeah.
So Neil, when I was a fellow at University of Florida and I was presenting my research on visceral hyperalgesia, which was super clean, would come to me and say, you better start getting your hands dirty because we're going into the shit business. And I said, no, please. They call me Gucci girl in the GI lab because if it's dirty, if the colonoscopy was not clean, I was out of there. I'm like, sorry, we do the prep, come back next week. I'm not cleaning the patient, right? And then the mere mention of having to actually play with stools and putting it in there was just something I never, ever thought that would even happen to me. And, you know, when a patient is about to die from C. diff and you've tried everything from, you know, antibodies after antibiotics to, you know, clinical trials. And that was my path, right? I was doing clinical trials and Neil was doing fecal transplant. And we met when I was doing a clinical trial on fecal material in a capsule, because every time I would do a clinical trial for pharma, if the pharmaceutical product didn't work, I would do fecal transplant, because I would say, well, you know, the patient trusted me to heal them, and whether they got placebo or the drug didn't work, it's my obligation to make sure they're fine. So I would do fecal transplant on them. And then I discovered all these things. And of course, so I blame Neil in a way for stepping into this, because I've stepped in fully, and every day I play with it. I can tell you the first time I was, you know, looking at collecting stools, I think I almost passed out. But then you develop, you know, that survivor or that, you know, warrior mentality that you're like, I can do this. I can do this. I went into GI. I'm tough. I'm playing with scopes. I can do this. And that's what happened.
So I'm really curious about your history. Can you just give us a little background about like your family and where you came from, who you married? Because I find it all really interesting. Your past is fantastic to where you've ended up right now.
Increasing the volume. So I was born in Morocco. My parents, you know, my background is, I'm pretty much a mutt, like Spanish background, German, you name it, it's all mixed in. Italian, I was happy to see on 23andMe, I have some Italian blood, and Greek. So I'm a mutt. And essentially my parents immigrated to Montreal. I was raised in Montreal, went to medical school in Nova Scotia. My siblings all went to McGill and wanted the McGill route, and I went Dalhousie because I didn't want to, you know, in my family, you had to live at home if you're going to college in Montreal. But if you go to college elsewhere, then that's the only exception to moving out of the house. So I said, okay, I'm going to Dalhousie. And Dalhousie was fun because it was, you got into the rotations of medicine right off, you know, from day one, you were seeing patients. So that was kind of fun for me. And then I was going to go back to Montreal, and I had a cold, and I was interviewing for positions for internal medicine and GI. For internal medicine, I didn't even think I was going to be a GI at the time. And I got an interview at University of Miami, Jackson Memorial Hospital, and they paid for my plane ticket because they loved Canadians back then, and they paid for my hotel. So I said, oh, free trip to Miami. And then I show up in Miami and I'm doing the interview, and they're showing me like a room of 10 CAT scans and, you know, just like beautiful. I mean, I don't know if you've been to Miami, Jackson Memorial. It's a city in itself, right?
It is.
Wow.
And back then, I mean, we had one CAT scan in the whole country of Canada. I mean, in the whole country of Canada, right? So you show up in Miami and you've got like 10 CAT scans in a room, and it's like, and then they sell you on Miami, and they're like, oh, you could live in, you know, on the beach, and then you could go to the hospital. I'm like, I'm there, I'm coming. So I showed up, and that was during the world of HIV. You know, that's when HIV was really, you know, really starting. And I remember here I am, this, you know, kid that my parents kept like in a, you know, protected and clean environment. And then I'm moving to Miami, and I'm dealing with, HIV, like 12 HIV patients a night, and patients are like throwing blood all over the walls. And you remember I don't know, you're probably much younger than I am, but this was war, right? And so me and Neil and my colleagues from Miami, we trained under those circumstances of patients coming and crashing from HIV, kind of what we're seeing with COVID, right?
Yeah, it does have some, and yes, I did have that. Yeah. We had our AIDS ward where you would have to rotate, and then you would have to make sure, because their CD4 counts were so low that so you didn't want to give them any microbes that could potentially hurt them. We just didn't know back then.
You didn't know, and we were so scared, right? If we got pricked by a needle, you'd hear the residents like chopping their fingers. They were so freaked out. And I remember, going into a room with a patient that was altered mental status and being dressed like an astronaut going into space. Yeah. And I met my husband, by the way, in Jackson Memorial, first day of internship, and we became best friends because we were on call together. And it wasn't like Scrubs or ER, although kind of, but it was kind of fun. We were together, we'd like work hard and do call, and then we'd go party after on South Beach. So we met under the circumstances, and I think some of my best friends, and I've been married to my husband almost 30 years. So I think that environment really, bonded us forever, the memories, my colleagues, because it was really survival. And he used to joke, because he used to say, "You look like an astronaut going into space, going to see these patients." I'm like, I'm not coming in, because we had TB, resistant TB. Oh, yeah. We had HIV. We had all sorts of infections in that hospital. So it was really war zone. And at the same time, you're treating these patients that are swallowing bags of cocaine and in condoms, right? And you have to like watch the bag evacuate. So it was intense. I mean, I was taking care of, HIV patients, criminals. I mean, it was interesting times, but it forms you. It makes you, a tough doctor that you can survive, helping people no matter who they are, right? So I think it was great for me. It was a great education. It was a great, and then in Miami in residency, some guy said, because my husband wanted to go into cardiology, and I said, well, maybe I'll go into cardiology. And then some guy said to me, we don't take, and I said, how's GI? Is GI a good field? It looks kind of fun. I mean, it's like surgery, but without doing surgeries. And he said, we don't take women in GI, so don't bother.
Whoa.
And that's all it took. It was like, okay.
You do now.
Right then and there.
Challenge taken.
You ripped off your spacesuit in this room full of AIDS people vomiting blood, and you're like, I'm going to do GI.
Yeah. I'm GI.
Looking the lion.
You sound like you're talking shit. Let's talk shit.
Let's talk shit. So basically, yeah. And back then, GI, and it was actually a miracle, because back then, GI was like the flexible SIG, where you're like, touching, you're like, did you train with that? You were probably colonoscope, right?
I am actually a few years older than you. And so,
no way.
Yeah, so I went through everything you're saying. I 100% did, but I will say this, you've got way more guts than I did. I interviewed at Miami, and I looked at the volume and what was going on, because Miami had that. They had a bigger HIV population, tons of AIDS, lots of trauma, all that stuff. And I'm like, I like the warmth. So I was training in Nebraska, and I just got sick of the cold. And so I just moved south. I just drew a line from California, Arizona across. And it basically, Texas is like Midwest, but south. Yes. So but Miami, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I do residency here, you're just not going to sleep ever.
And actually, I was sleeping because I came out. So I was a Canadian trained. So we trained with like physical exams, right? You examine the patient and you actually say, oh, gallbladder problem, just by doing, Trobe space and percussion, etc. So, it was much faster for me to take care of patients. So me and my husband used to have like he would come in the call room. He's like, you're sleeping? I didn't sleep a wink. And I'm like, well, and then we would have this competition of who would discharge the patient and treat the patient the fastest. So there'd be a board, and it'd be like Hazen and Steinberg, and I'd have like 12 HIV patients, and I'd be like, I'm giving them this, that, and then, okay, they're fine out of the hospital one day, and then it'd be like 0 Hazen, 20 Steinberg.
And then eventually he just made everybody DNR and just slowly started crossing their names. We do things for challengers, right? I mean, we do things. Love it.
Why do you go into medicine otherwise if it's not to treat? That's what bothered me with this whole COVID is like, it was the idea of doing nothing. The patient's having shortness of breath, oxygen desats, and you do nothing. I couldn't understand that mentality because you have to try.
So I have a feeling that we're just going to go all over the map here. So I'm going to get right off because there's something I was super impressed that you did. You gave a lecture on COVID and ivermectin way back. Yes. So now ivermectin, now all these things that were being said are now coming to light and going, what the heck? Why aren't we? Yeah. How did you realize ivermectin fairly early on?
I started the protocol with the hydroxychloroquine, which went completely political. And my idea was, well, makes sense, right? It's kind of like what we do with H. pylori, multiple drug combo. So I thought, well, hydroxychloroquine as azithromycin would be killing the virus, and then vitamin C, D, and zinc would boost the microbiome, right? So in other words, you kill, but you boost, right? So you bring the balance. And so when hydroxychloroquine, at the same time, Dr. Barodi said, you know what, I think ivermectin is a better solution because he was investigating himself. And, Dr. Barodi is the man we all follow for his leadership on fecal transplant, but also he was the brain behind H. pylori and triple therapy. So he was the one that said combination therapy. And he's big on combination therapy. I mean, he's used combination therapy for 2 patients in Parkinson's. He published on that. So basically for me, it was following his direction. And he said to me, you know what, we need to do ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc. And I said, yeah, but you got to add the vitamin C and vitamin D. Nothing should be done without vitamin C and D because you're killing the virus. And in fact, the microbiome is going to tell the story and it's going to be amazing. Because I showed the data to Dr. Eamon Quigley, and Dr. Quigley, right?
Yeah. The godfather of probiotics.
Yes, and by the way, he was like, fantastic data. Fantastic. And he's on my paper that's coming out. So.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah. So I got Dr. Bozkurt from Turkey. I got Dr. Barodi, of course, in the paper, and Eamon Quigley. So, and it's basically blank, susceptible marker for COVID-19. And we know we're going to show in the microbiome why ivermectin is working.
Oh, that's cool.
So look out for it.
So both Eric and I are big fans of a podcast, Brett Weinstein, the Dark Horse podcast.
Yes.
And he had the critical care doctor from New York.
Pierre Corey?
Yeah, Pierre Corey.
Yes.
And I was just floored because, like all of us, we there's only so many hours in the day and we do quite a bit of research and ivermectin caught me off guard. I was behind the curve on that one. I looked back and went, how did I miss that? How did I miss ivermectin? That's why I was so impressed that you were on it right away.
Yeah. And by the way, when you see what it's doing to the microbiome, it's going to be as clear as light. Because what happened is because I have a CRO and I'm able to put these protocols through pipelines through the FDA. Uh-huh. And by the way, I did it because I had enough of pharma. I had enough of putting these products. And then you saw with the Alzheimer's study, this Alzheimer drug goes into market and the benefits are like, what's going on there? So I said we need to have doctors lead the path for pharma. In other words, doctors come up with these solutions and bring them to the FDA. And so I kind of started this with COVID, was more of a lead to show, hey, look, I'm taking combination therapy and I'm putting them through a pipeline. I wrote the protocol and I submitted to the FDA and the FDA approved it right off the bat. The FDA then had second thought because they said, well, you need to have a placebo. And I said, a placebo
A
in
placebo in COVID?
In the middle of a pandemic? I'm like, that's like,
You
and
just
I
got
said
treating
that,
him.
What?
yeah. And I said, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Rome is burning. Are you asking me to use a bucket that doesn't have water to throw on the fire? I
That's a
mean,
great
we
analogy.
know
That really is an
that's not,
awesome analogy.
Okay, the house is on fire. I'm going to give you a bucket,
Yeah.
and you're going to get a bucket. Now go put it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then watch
Yeah.
one of those buckets.
one's going to have water and one's going to have nothing. Makes
One's
perfect
going to have
sense.
one's going to have gasoline more
Yes.
more than anything, because we're talking about COVID here. I mean, it's like giving a placebo is like giving gasoline.
Okay, so something's burning, send a fire truck, and over here, send a school bus. So, yeah. It's really
That's it. So that's basically what happened. And then I started, when I submitted these protocols, I said, okay, fine. The placebo is going to be a vitamin. So we did vitamin versus the other thing. But what we discovered is when we started looking at the microbiome and we found COVID in the stools, whole genome sequencing, presented it at American College of Gastro. And then it got published, took 6 months to get published on gut pathogen because they couldn't believe it, right? They were, what, is this real? We had to submit, it was sent to the WHO. I mean, it was just a ridiculous, long-term time to get that paper published. And so when we started looking at the microbiome, we discovered something in the microbiome. And we discovered something in the microbiome of those that were super sick compared to those that were not so sick, compared to those who never got COVID to begin with, but yet were exposed to patients with COVID. So we said, wow, if this is a susceptible marker, it basically became like a susceptibility marker, right? And so we determined that if we don't know the baseline of the microbiome in a patient, and we're giving them placebo, and that person has those microbes are super high, in other words, where's your immunity in your gut, right? And your immunity at baseline is super high, and I'm giving you a sugar pill. Well, of course, it doesn't matter because you already have super strong microbiome to survive COVID. So is it fair to compare a placebo to a person, that doesn't have a good microbiome? You're comparing like an athlete running a marathon to a person on a wheelchair. Unless you know the microbiome, you're really doing placebo-controlled trials useless in COVID, in my opinion.
You're bringing up something that is, could be a complete game changer in how pharma would do any type of research in the future.
Yes.
Because what you're saying is, if you do not have, and we've discussed this kind of stuff on other podcasts, if you do not have a diverse microbiome, are you able to take full advantage of these medications that we believe are helping? Because the FDA determined that there's a safety profile on it, therefore it goes to the second trial, and then just like you said, in phase 3 and 4 trials, you're 6% better than placebo. So because of that, it's now a $14 billion drug that got bought by a bigger company.
Yes, absolutely. And we are entering into a world of research now that is no longer research, in my opinion. Medicine is no longer an art, it's a business. And that's scary to me because that's not why I went into medicine. I'm sure that's not why you went into medicine. We're all individuals. We should all have an individual treatment. We have the technology now, especially with what we do at ProgenaBiome, to understand with precision these microbes of the individual. And the future is beautiful because it's going to be a readjustment of microbes to attain that precision medicine. We need to get there. We can't be stopped because roadblocks is what stops innovations and stops answers. And we got to keep asking questions and say, is this correct? Is this safe? Why are we doing this? Why are we not? The moment we stop asking questions, we stop science, we stop research, we stop findings, answers. And then, in my opinion, humanity is lost. You're talking about diversity. Look at the diversity of microbes over the last 100 years. We've gone from diverse microbiome to now undiverse. Look at 1980. The rate of autism was 1 in 2,000. Now it's 1 in 20 in New Jersey. Something is happening in the microbiome that we have to pay attention to. And is it the herbs we're giving? Is it these vitamins that are over the counter? It supposedly have the vitamins, right? Or is it the probiotics? Is it the right probiotics, the wrong probiotics? So I think all that we need to fine tune a little bit more.
Fine tune is an understatement. That is.
And I'm sure like people come to you and say, Doc, I'm on this probiotic. And you're looking at this bottle and you're shaking your head, right? Probably.
Dr. Hazan, have you met Kiran Krishnan from Microbiome Labs?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Very, very, very smart microbiologist. We had him on the podcast, and we discussed this exact thing about the fact, do you know if it's alive? Do you know that you can get a rail car, you know, like one of those big giant crates for like $2,000 from who knows where? And then anyways, we went into the whole aspect of probiotics and how easy it is to make your own probiotic.
Yes.
Put your label on it, but you have no idea if it's going to do that. You know, you have no idea if there's data it's going to survive. So absolutely on the same page.
And I think bacteria in the gut that's live is dangerous, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's in your book. You
that's
discuss,
my hypothesis. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because in your book you had a brief segment about how people in the desert, when they would get dysentery, they would eat camel dung.
Yes. Yes.
And Kiran brought up that exact same thing.
Yes.
Soil-based. People figured out early on that when somebody got sick, they would eat the camel dung and they would get better. And you brought it up there, which is fascinating.
Well, World War II, the soldiers were stuck. I forget where, but they had cholera, and that's how, you know, the Bedouins told them just eat the apples from the camel, which is really the poop from the camel, and it cured the cholera all of a sudden.
Isn't that crazy?
I know. We're not going to go into that because I don't think people want to eat that. But I think we can understand the microbes that are playing, right? So that was my thing, is we're heading into the world.
Stop. I just saw Eric trying to order a camel off Amazon. No, you don't need to do that.
No, I've got a coupon for camel apples.
Oh.
That's what it is.
I already trademarked Sisters of Camelot. So. I was in Jordan with my sisters, and we were on camels, and of course, you know, they're pooping all over, and it came to me, I said, I need to analyze the stools. So of course I took because I did bring some kits with me, and I'm taking it, I took it home and looked at it. So I said, okay, we're starting Sisters of Camelot, but we're not going to start that because my plan is not to make people eat fecal.
Because of you're the reason why when I'm coming back from a country, and in customs, they're like, did you bring any animals? Do you have any food? Do you have any camel dung on you? And I'm like, why would I have camel dung? It's you. It's your fault.
It was me. Actually, one time my husband brought an apple to an island, and actually we got fined. I think they got the memo. They were like, Dr. Hazan's coming. There's probably some microbes in there. Stay away, $200 fine.
All right. So we got so many things I would love to talk about, but I do want to really hone in on ProgenaBiome for several different reasons. Number one, I am also trying to run a different company and, you know, have all this stuff. You've got a lot of stuff going on. We got a lot of similarities in how your enthusiasm and your need to keep your curiosity forces you to start other companies to sort of meet the need that you're trying to find. So can you please tell everybody what ProgenaBiome is?
So ProgenaBiome is a genetic sequencing lab. What does that mean? It basically looks at the microbes, the genetics of the microbes, so the fingerprint of your microbiome. Kind of like your DNA, but the DNA of all your microbes that coexist and cohabitate in your gut. So when I explain this, we have a choice when we look at the microbiome to look superficially. It's kind of like scuba diving and being at the ocean, in the top of the ocean and seeing guppies, or going super deep into the ocean and seeing the life. And so we go super deep with every patient. So we can look superficially and do a lot of patients with that cartridge. So when we do genetic sequencing, you have to take that stool sample, which is the size of a fingernail, and then we have to tag it and do library preps, they're called. And then we put them on these cartridges. And then essentially the cartridge, we have a choice. We can use the cartridge and do multiple development and see the surface, or we can go deep, deep and use that same cartridge into the depth. So we go into the depth of the microbiome to look at the microbes, the species, because that's what we want. We want species of microbes because we as doctors understand species. You know, to the rest of forever, the world of microbiome has been Firmicutes, Bacteroides, right? But that's very superficial. So if you remember microbiology, you go phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't want to be at the phylum. Phylum is like looking at planet Earth, right? I don't want to be at the class. That's like looking at London. I want to be almost at the family to say Mr. and Mrs. Jones, but I really want to see the species, to see the kid of Mr. and Mrs. Jones who has autism. The species tells the story, right? Because when you see mycoplasma for the first time, which is acellular, doesn't have a cell wall, and you see 40,000 sequences or 40,000 mycoplasma shapes into the microbiome, you say, this kid has mycoplasma and that's the cause of his problem. Maybe, right? Because then the next step would be, well, what is mycoplasma secreting? And is mycoplasma secreting something and therefore active in that patient, or it's just a dead organism? But even if it's a dead organism, why does that kid have so much relative abundance of that? So really, it's looking at the species and understanding these species. Yesterday, I was excited because I had a Crohn's patient. So remember, for Crohn's, I'm always looking for Mycobacteria paratuberculosis, right? Because that was Dr. Barodi's idea that MAP is the cause of Crohn's, right? But other scientists have come in and said, well, Yersinia enterolytica is the cause of Crohn's. And then others have said Malassezia furfur. And so you look at all that and you go, well, which one is it? Is it Malassezia furfur? Is it Yersinia enterolytica? Is it MAP? So it's important to look at the species. And when you look at the species, you start going, wow, this patient has a lot of E. coli, a lot of Shigella, a lot of Haemophilus. There's definitely a dysbiosis there, right? Because we know that these microbes have been the culprit of problems. E. coli, chronic urinary tract infections, Shigella, all these bugs. So when you look at the species and you see the species and you can kind of make a correlation, it helps in the diagnosis. It helps guide you with the patient. And so to me, that's what it was basically. So that's why I started 42 clinical trials. We're actually up to 59 now on every diseases, because it was that look. Every time a patient comes in with Crohn's, we would say, Crohn's database, go in there. But what we discovered from the beginning with ProgenaBiome, when we looked at everyone, and that was something that made me think, what's out there like Biome is not legit, because they're comparing individuals to others, but we're all different. How can we be compared? So the first thing we discovered with ProgenaBiome is we're all different, which I know, by common sense, right? We all have different fingerprints. How can we have the same microbiome? And why would my microbiome that was in Jordan be compared to someone that lives in Greece, right? Completely different microbiome. But why am I healthy with this microbiome and this person is not healthy with that microbiome, right? That's the $1 million question. So we started noticing, well, if we are all different, how do we compare? How do we understand the microbiome? So the only thing that you can compare is really within the family. And then the other thing that you can compare is within the individual. So whenever you have a product that you want to give it, you have a patient with Crohn's, and you attain a cure, and that was my thing that I would speak about at conferences, attain a cure, understand the microbiome, right? Because if you attain a cure on the same patient, and you see the microbiome before and after the cure, you know that something changed in the microbiome, and what was it that changed that obtained the cure? And so that's basically my path, is looking at families. And then from there, once you have like a group of microbes that you've identified and said, okay, well, that makes sense. This is the bugs. These are the bugs that are related with Alzheimer's, because I've improved the patient's memory. And now these bugs have disappeared. Now let me look at other groups and see if those bugs are in those patients with Alzheimer's, and let's come up with an assay that's a formula. So ideally what I want is the dictionary of all the bugs with diseases.
So let me back that up just a little bit.
Yes.
First of all, it's super fascinating, and there's a lot going on here. But
Yes.
as a gastroenterologist, and I know that my colleagues get this, I get a lot of second opinions, and so they'll come in and they'll just hand me this pile, and inevitably there's some sort of stool analysis.
Yes.
And then somebody will circle things and then say, you need to take this supplement for this supplement for this supplement for this. And I've always just flipped it over and said, I'm sorry, just because we can analyze it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to make recommendations on this or that we can manipulate it.
Right.
So what you're saying, just to clarify, is that ProgenaBiome, your company, is doing a much deeper dive and making the association with diseases with the person that comes in so that you can at least develop a trend and start to predict how or what we need to do for it.
And the other thing we did is basically we created an assay that we felt were the 25, actually 50 most important microbes for disease. And we validated that. So what does that mean? We took microbes that were cultured, we bought them, and we put them through the pipeline. And lo and behold, C. diff was C. diff because we had the microbe. So that's validation process, right? The second thing we did is we verified the validation process. In other words, let me repeat that stool sample. Am I getting the same value? And then let's reproduce it, right? So let's reproduce it at month 1. Let's reproduce it by someone else. Another technician takes on the same standard operating procedure of how we develop this assay and basically reproduces the assay. So I was very big at the beginning, and I hired a genetic sequencer, PhD physician who is actually behind the BRCA gene and is genius, who developed the assay for me, with me. And I said to him from the beginning, I said, listen, I want to be able to give you a stool sample, and I want you to be able to reproduce the same thing. In other words, I give you my stool sample today, tomorrow, next year, it should be the same fingerprint, the same exact colors. Because if I'm giving you a stool sample today, and in a month, I'm giving you another stool sample, but it's no longer the same colors and the same fingerprint, well, you're comparing apples and oranges. And that was the whole problem with all these sequencing lab, because I remember, and again, Neil Stolman, I would call him because like you, I was getting patients that would bring me stool samples and I would say, what does that mean? I mean, like Bacteroides in your gut, what does that mean? And I would call Neil, and he's like, nothing, it's all bogus. And I know there's a whole holistic path out there that has looked into this, but they have their vision, but unfortunately, we need to bring the holistic and the idea that holistic healers have achieved and bring it into GI to understand it with the microbiome, in my opinion, right? Bring everything that's out there and say, okay, well, we all see this from this guy and this from this guy. Let's put it all together to say, yes, this is accurate information. This is valid, verified, and reproducible data. Because everything in science, you have to reproduce it, right? If I do fecal transplant on a patient that has alopecia areata, and my patient grows hair like Dr. Colleen Kelly, then I've just reproduced Dr. Colleen Kelly's data, and I could say, well, I did this A, B, C, D, like Dr. Kelly, and I got A, B, C, D, the same thing, and my patient grew hair, right? So reproduction of validation, verification, and reproduction of data is very important in research. But, the problem is there's too many. We live in a world where people want to just fast development of products, fast sell, like sell a probiotic, sell this, sell that. And we've stopped the research because it takes time to do research. But it doesn't have to take time to do research.
Were you going to say something, Eric?
Yeah, I had a quick question. So you've talked about the microbiome, and obviously you've been able to look at different diseases and then figure out where they match up and where they're the same. Something that's kind of interesting to me, though, is that locally, that makeup of that microbiome, of course, is at the local level in the colon. But have y'all looked at the second level and tried to map out that it also matches not just in the makeup of the microbiome, but what those postbiotic metabolites would look like, so that the systemic responses are also the same to mimic what the makeup is for
absolutely an excellent point. So the microbiome is different at every location in the colon. What we're doing is really a beginning of seeing what it's looking like at a deep level. The next step that we're going to do, and we're going to be working with a company that developed a capsule that is guided, that takes a sample of stool from every different locations, where we can show with precision that the stomach microbiome looks like this, the small bowel microbiome looks like this, the cecum looks like this, the transverse colon. So that's going to be coming, because with that technology, hopefully we can deliver precision microbes to those areas to achieve cures in the future. And, capsule endoscopy, I was the first one of the first doctors to start using it. And that was the first time that I saw myself a parasite floating in the small bowel. That was a revelation, right? When you look at the sequencing of the microbiome and you see all these microbes, and I said that I found C. diff in my gut, you start going, wow, there's a mystery there that needs to be figured out.
Yeah.
Because the microbiome is everything. You're born with a lot of good microbes. You die with very little good microbes, right? And then the microbes consume your body and put you back into the earth. So from the earth to the earth, I mean, we're proving that with the microbiome. So even and I think for me, the biggest lesson about the microbiome is really that diversity is key to life, key to health. And I was just speaking on the microbiome at a farm, Polyphase Farm, that's really big on regenerative farming. And so they believe in diversity of farming. They believe in, coconut. You can't just put like avocado trees. You got to put the avocados with the blueberry trees, with the tomatoes, with everything. And it's the diversity that creates the beauty of the soil and the amazing, matrix of microbes underneath the ground that feeds us, really. So it's beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah, they try to discourage monocropping now because it will destroy the soil. Yeah. So they want to switch it up. Yeah, you're right. Go ahead.
The Amazon jungle, they try to do that. They try to utilize things from the Amazon jungle. So
one more time, in your book, you're not discussing the examples that you have in the book, but I was just thinking you had that great section on we should be doing green burials, because what we're not doing is giving our microbiomes back. We have microbiomes, our trillions of microbiome, we should give them back to the soil so that then other, it'll fertilize plants. We shouldn't be embalming ourselves. We should be green burying and let that happen.
We should. So that's what we should be doing. I have someone at the door, but I'm going to ignore them.
You can go get them. You can
bring them on.
Bring them on. Let's bring them on the show for all you know. I mean, listen, we have some reach. Maybe Dr. Barodi saw this and said, I'm going to fly over there and say hi to her.
Yeah, that would be great. Is he? Do you have him? That would be awesome.
One quick question about ProgenaBiome, and then
I talk to Dr. Barodi like every day, 2 to 3 times a day. We're on the same time zone. Love the man.
We'll have to.
Genius.
I've never personally met him. Obviously, read tons of his work. Eamon Quigley, I've met a ton of times, and he's just so nice and so approachable and everything.
So nice.
Quick question for you, not for Dr. Hazan, but to Sabine. Is it Sabine or Sabine?
Sabine, it's fine.
Sabine. How I built this aspect. So as somebody that built ProgenaBiome, how did you think about organizing like that stuff that was really intimidating to me? How do you build a business?
I built it basically, my attitude with everything in life is I just jump in. and I just expect, to find something. So I basically jumped into it. I saw, it was during the Woolsey fire, the whole backyard burned, and I was in communications with Dr. Feingold, who was the father of anaerobic bacteria in the gut. He actually wrote the book Anaerobic Infections. And I was in communications with him because earlier on, I had done a fecal transplant on a patient who had Alzheimer's, and he remembered his daughter's date of birth 6 months later. So to me, that was one of those, and Dr. Barodi likes to call it Martians. It's one of those Martians that comes in your front door and you say, wow, there's life on Mars. And so I called Dr. Feingold and said, what am I seeing when I change which microbe am I seeing when I change the microbiome in a patient with Alzheimer's and he remembers his daughter's date of birth? And Dr. Feingold said, you're seeing this bacteria that I cultured for so many years. Nobody wanted to take on the study and to support it. So I'm giving you the protocol. Get yourself a next generation sequencer machine, get yourself a lab, a scientist. And he showed me the path, right? He was 97 years old. And he showed me the path. He gave me the paper. And then I put it in my safe because I said, well, I'm not going to start a genetic lab. That's like, at least a couple million. And so what happened is he passed away during the Woolsey fire. My whole backyard burned. And the family calls me and they go, Dr. Hazan, we want to give you like all the books of our dad. And he signed all his books. So I have about 1,000 books in my, I took a pickup truck and I picked up the books. My husband thought I was crazy. He's like, our house is burning and you're picking up these books. And I said, don't worry about the house. I don't care. This is more important. This is legacy. This is his work. I wanted to take it on. And I felt like it was like, tag, you're it, right? And about a month later, I started communicating with Dr. Barodi because Neil had introduced us at ACG and said, oh, by the way, Sabine also cured Crohn's disease with fecal transplant. And he said, what? He took my card and then called me in December. And I said, by the way, I got the paperwork from, I got everything. And I found a couple patents with you and Dr. Feingold. You guys were communicating together. He goes, wonderful man, wonderful scientist, brilliant mind. And I said, well, we got to continue this. And then he said, by the way, I'm working with Dr. Adams, who's publishing a data on autistic children post-fecal transplant. So he said, be ready, you're going to have the flood. This is Dr. Barodi. And I said, autism? I don't even know anything about autism. No way. And then next thing you know, I start my lab. And I told my husband, I said, we're not rebuilding the backyard. I don't care about the house. I'm building a genetic sequencing lab. So he goes, sure, honey. And if you know my husband's a great guy. He's a cardiologist, heart doctor, amazing. And he's like, yeah, sure, honey, do whatever you want. You want to analyze shit? Go for it. So I said, okay, I'm buying a machine. So, and it was kind of at that point in my life where, your kids are growing up and you've done the raising and they're blooming on their own. And you're, at that point where you say, okay, well, what does my life mean now? I'm no longer a mom. Okay, great. I'm a GI doctor. I do research for pharma, but now pharma is getting into the shit business and we don't even understand it. So I saw this light and I just said, I think this is my path. And then lo and behold, everything was just opened up. I mean, my first case of fecal transplant was a patient with metastatic mesothelioma that I submitted the protocol to the FDA. The FDA thought I was crazy for wanting to put stools in a woman's colon who was dying, but her hemoglobin was 7. She wasn't eating anything. She was dying. I had to fight with them to let me do it. And I saw her starting to crave chicken nuggets after the fecal transplant, the same cravings that her grandson had. So that was an eye-opener for me. She ended up living a lot more months than she was supposed to begin with. She should have died within the month. But I think the fecal transplant really helped her. And I think we're seeing that with, MD Anderson's work with fecal transplant and chemo, et cetera. So I think, so that was the path. I didn't really think of money because people always ask me, well, how do you support it? How do you venture? And I said, well, let me create a nonprofit. So I created a nonprofit. And then next thing you know, I wrote the book with Shelley and everything. Like even Shelley came to me in my office. It was just like divine intervention. Shelley Albert.
Who is Shelley? I don't know her.
So Shelley is an author. She writes books, and her husband was a friend of mine, and we started talking. He's a pilot. And he said, and I said, I need to write this book. And he goes, why don't you have Shelley help you? And she puts it in the book, and she wrote, I helped Dr. Hazan get her shit together. And then she did, because this is what happened. I gave her all my stack of papers, and I said, this is chapter 1. Let's start chapter 1. And then she started. So as she was building, and we were building that book, and then Dr. Brody, of course, every time we had a chapter, we're like, what do you think? Is that said? He's like, I like the quotes. I like, because he's very much into, quotes and old quotes from, people in the past. So we started, writing. And then at the same time, I started building these protocols. And I had a team of writers that I had my main writer that I said, let's start writing these protocols. And little by little, it was built. And Andreas showed me from day one a patient with Crohn's disease. And he showed me the microbiome, and I changed the microbiome. I played with it with certain products, like you, that I believed could change the gut. And I was able to reach a cure in this kid, and I was able to see the cure in the microbiome. So before and after. And so when I saw that, I said, I have something. And then I saw C. diff in the first 17 patients, I saw C. diff in all of them. So I said, maybe we're wrong about C. diff. And I actually challenged the industry, the infectious disease doctors, because I said, maybe we all have C. diff, and maybe it's what we give our gut that kills off all the microbes, the diversity that causes C. diff to start secreting its toxin, right? And so, infectious disease are very pragmatic. They're like, well, if you didn't culture it, then it's not there. And I kept saying, well, how do you culture a dead bacteria? How do you take a tree that's dead and expect to plant it? It doesn't work. I mean, you almost have to culture it anaerobically, right? And so I said, well, but the next generation sequencing shows the whole genetic sequence of the microbe, right? And then when we did RNA pipeline, which is so we have a bunch of pipelines when we look at microbes, right? So we actually can do a DNA pipeline that looks at our bacteria, or we can do an RNA pipeline, which looks at the bacteria reproducing. So if you see a microbe is reproducing and you see it high in the messenger RNA pipeline, then you know that this microbe is active.
That's a game changer.
That's awesome.
Yes, that's a game changer.
So we showed it.
Nobody's ever said that before. Because I remember Mark you know who Mark Pimentel is in Cedars?
Yes, I know Mark.
So I remember Mark was describing, well, when we're doing these stool studies, it's like going into a neighborhood and looking at the trash and then making these assumptions about what's going on the inside. That's just trash is what you're looking at. Oh, the mRNA, that's huge. That's big.
That's huge. Yes. And then the metabolomes is the next step, right? Are those microbes secreting something? Like I'm finding the sulfovibrio in the gut, right? And we know the sulfovibrio was linked with autism from Dr. Feingold. So he thought that the sulfovibrio or Clostridium perfringens could play a role with autism. Well, when you see the sulfovibrio in a family, in one kid that has autism and the rest of the family doesn't have autism and don't have it, but the kid has 40% relative abundance of the sulfovibrio, you don't even need to do metabolomic studies on that, because you know that that's the problem most likely. And in that kid, fecal transplant would be a solution.
Oh, that's so cool. I talk to my patients that, especially people with certain food cravings, are battling their weight and stuff. And I'm like, well, it could be that it's not really you in control with your microbiome. Would you discuss briefly your two daughters and your experience?
Yes. So So I took antibiotics. My oldest also, and I have a hard time. I used to eat, like in Miami, I used to eat the whole tuna Subway, and would not gain a pound. Now I eat a cucumber and I gain a pound. And my little one eats 5,000, 10,000 calories. Sometimes she'll eat like at 1 o'clock in the morning a whole pizza and then an apple pie. Doesn't gain weight. She's a toothpick, right? And so we looked at the family microbiome, and actually there is a group of microbes that is potentially the obesity marker. There's also a group of markers that are potentially the cholesterol. And so this is a new world, right, that we're entering. So even with Alzheimer's, we're seeing similarities in the microbiome. So we need to understand. But more important, I think, than understanding the microbes is understanding the environment of the microbes. Because you saw studies when they do, so we know that when we do fecal transplant, we are achieving improvement in patients, right? But you saw the studies where they removed the fecal material and they just had the liquid and they implanted it and they still got improvement, right? So something in the substance, something in the environment, the substances, I think, make a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
It's all going to make sense to you when you read the paper with ivermectin.
Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah. I'm literally like thrilled.
And vitamin C and vitamin D, because I'm going to be writing Linus Pauling was right. So that's coming.
With everything you said there, I have a couple quick comments.
Yes.
Number one, your doorbell rang, and he did tell you that a Martian would show up on your front doorstep. That could have been, and you just let it walk away.
Oh, well.
And then I have a quick story for you.
Yes.
That we were interviewing a fellow. He was from Yale, and
yes.
This has got to be about 8 to 10 years ago. So before fecal microbial transplant (FMT) was being discussed, we're out to dinner with him. I took him to a nice steak restaurant here in my city, and I was asking him about his research, and he goes, "Well, what we're showing is," and he's talking, and the waitress was there, and she was like, "This is interesting," and she was listening. And she was a little bit obese. And he goes, "Well, we're taking stool from skinny mice and giving it to fat mice, and those fat mice are losing weight, and then vice versa." And right. I was like, "No, that's so cool," because it was like the first time I'd ever heard of it. He was a fellow doing the original research on this. And then the funniest thing happened. She was, once again, I said she was a little overweight. She looks over at this busboy who's all of about 6'4", 120 pounds. She goes, "Bill, you are the sexiest person in this restaurant right now." Because he went on to say that if you live with somebody, you end up sharing the microbiome with each other. It's
so true.
Yeah, and she yells to this poor guy who's probably like 17. She's like, "Do you want to move in? Do you want to move in?" I'm like, might be a little premature, but I don't know. Maybe she wasn't, so.
Hey, you know what I do every day as a routine? I take my little one, my 17, and I rub my face to her. So I'm like, I want some of that microbiome on my skin. That's the best lotion right there. I mean, I don't need to put lotion on my face.
See, I'm scared that I'll ruin my kids' mojo by giving them my microbiome.
That's a problem.
They're great kids.
My little one, who actually is a hypermetabolizer, that's what I call her. I asked her to donate stools for me. I said, your stools could be worth a lot of money because that could be a cure for obesity. And I said, $1,000 for one sample, Scarlett. She's like, "Nope, not giving it. I'm not going to be a rat." She's like, "I'm not going to be a rat lab, Mom." She gave me one sample. That's it. That was all. That's it.
And this is not hyperbole. In your book, you discuss about how the marathon runner, they took his stool, gave it to mice, and the mice immediately, with no extra training, could run 13% more than they could before.
Before we publish this episode, we need to get shitstudying.com and have it ready to go. I'm just saying.
Well, I will give you credit. A lot of the things I come across, you do trademark. It's like you have an idea and you'll just like call your trademark attorney and they're just trademarking everything.
I have, because it's kind of funny because in medicine, and you come up with an idea. A businessman takes your idea and makes a big company out of it. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, that was my idea. How many doctors have I seen over the course of my career that have come up with cures, and a businessman came, took that cure and made it a business, And the doctor now, Dr. Feingold, his book is the beginning of so many pharmaceutical companies, because that was, without his book, without that foundation, none of these pharmaceutical companies, existed. And, the fact that he had to struggle to get money for his research and keep putting all his money into his work, it was just not okay. And so when I started this and I started the company, I said to myself, first of all, I'm trademarking everything. And I learned from the best, Dr. Barodi, because he said, patent everything, trademark everything, because they will always say, somebody will take your idea and try to make something out of it. So the man is genius on multiple levels.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
And the fact that you actually are doing what people don't realize is that you're going down this microbial path, this fecal microbial path. And to get these studies done, you have to file these NDIs, these new drug.
It's expensive.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. It's
IND,
the new
yes.
IND. That's it.
New drugs. Yeah.
IND. And it's super expensive, and they make it difficult, or maybe they do on purpose or not. I don't know. I mean, obviously, as an investigator, where we have to deal with that a little bit with our supplement, we kind of skirt the FDA, but we still have to walk such a careful line. You want to talk science, but if you start talking too much science, then you have to file that IND and all
right. And I think, it's not hard to file. It's not hard to do it. I think this is where doctors need to join forces, because really, we lose when we don't work together. When we were in residency and internship, we were collaborating together to fix the patient. What happened with COVID was really sad to me, because the collaboration disappeared. All of a sudden, the media is telling you how to take care of your patient, and the politicians. And the whole time I was like, wait a minute. The moment a politician can tell me what Blottia does in COVID, or Rosaburia, or Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, let alone they should probably spell Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, never mind what it's doing. The moment a politician can tell me that, then I will respect what they're saying, or a media person. But the reality is we're entering a world of microbes. I think we should let the people that are in the microbiome world lead that path and lead the treatment. At the end of the day, achieve success, listen to the people that achieve success. Those doctors on the front line that realize different methods to treat. Forget ivermectin. Let's talk about others, right? Colchicine, cheap solutions, budesonide, Eliquis, all these, I think those were hints, right? When I have a patient that's oxygen saturation 73%, and I'm freaking out because the patient doesn't want to go to the hospital, but I know he's going to die on my shift, and I don't want him to die, I'm going to do everything in my power. So I'm going to give him everything I know, and then I'm going to call, my buddies, Brian Tyson, and say, Brian, what did you do with this? And then he would say, you know what, add this. And then Peter McCullough, what did you do? Add this. And so I think this is where the collaboration of physician comes into play, because we are the ones on the front line taking care of patients. And at the end of the day, who do you trust with your life? The doctors that guided you this way, right? I trusted with my life Tom Barodi. I just want to ask a quick question on this, because I saw that you have done presentations, you have submitted for different trials, you've done this. A lot of the doctors that have had the guts to do this have had backlash. Did you receive any backlash from social media, from the media, from anything? So because I'm working with the FDA oversight, and right now we're doing actually a clinical trial with the Department of Defense sponsoring it, which is another product altogether. I've not had the backlash as much. I'm sure I've had backlash when I tried to advertise to get patients. Definitely there were criticisms, and I always tried to stay under the radar as much as possible, talking about treatment. I'm more the microbiome girl, and I don't think anybody really knows about the microbiome. And if they want to go one-on-one with me and start trashing me, bring it on. The shit's just going to be starting.
Love that.
So, and I called the book in January, because let's talk shit, because I said, look, I could be full of shit, or I could know my shit. But I think I know my shit.
I think you do too.
That is awesome.
So we'll see. I mean, it's a path. It's a discovery path. It needs to be done. And I think I say to people, if you stop the innovation, you're going to be the patient coming for an innovation that's not going to be happening. Right now we get, how many patients do you get? Probably as much as me, that want fecal transplant for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, for autism, etc. You can't offer it. We're not there yet.
So let me ask you this. So you've got your lab set up. You do a really good job. We were doing it heavily. A guest stand-in for this podcast, Dr. Stuart Ackerman, him and I did a few of these. Super intelligent doctor, my colleague who trained in New York. We were lucky enough to steal him and bring him over about 5 years ago. He jumped all in on the fecal transplant, and he signed up. He did everything, and then like overnight, he said, well, this was like in between the FDA saying it's a drug and this, and then he was able to get the frozen capsules. And then it was like overnight, it became cost prohibitory because something happened with the lab, and we just quit doing it because we couldn't get it approved. Insurance wouldn't pay. And suddenly it was super expensive.
Right. So that's the peer pressure and the lobbying power, right, of lobbyists that basically, and I'm going to say it out there because I think it needs to be told. There is a lobbying movement that is basically stopping these drugs, these cheap solutions. And I think we need to stop that. We need to fight as physicians for that, because the moment we stop, trying to do what was right for the patient, fecal transplant being one of them, I think all of us that were doing fecal transplant joined forces in the microbiome meeting, the Malibu microbiome meeting that you probably saw, because of the fact that we saw that our ability to help patients were being cut. We were helping patients, using a bank that was good, and that ability was cut. I think, the onus is to go from that product that was sold of OpenBiome to go to Finch, right, which is now a pharmaceutical product. Then, that's fine as long as, the data shows that it's working, etc. But I think, stopping the right to try and doctors from doing fecal transplant or scaring them, I still do fecal transplant. Who's going to stop me? I mean, the FDA, has said you can do fecal transplant for C. diff, provided you do all these things. And even if you want to do it for autism, you have to submit an IND. Well, I just have to write the IND. I have to follow the protocol and follow the guidelines. Nobody's going to stop you if you're doing things the right way.
So you don't have to wait for them to approve the IND?
No, you have to wait for them to approve the IND. But for C. diff, you can do fecal transplant.
Yeah.
You just have to follow. You don't need an IND for fecal transplant for C. diff.
Yeah. So I got a few questions. So when a few of our listeners heard that we were going to have you on, they submitted some questions. Not easy questions either.
Okay.
So one of them is, unfortunately, somebody had irritable bowel-like symptoms, or probably SIBO, went to a doctor in her country in Europe and received a fecal microbial transplant, and she didn't feel very good 2 weeks afterwards, went back. He said, well, we just need to do it again. And it's from the same super donor. He has this, what he calls super donor. And she got it the second time, and she spiked a fever, started feeling really sick. And then the third time, he said, well, we just need you just need more of it. That's what's happening. You're not taking it. And unfortunately, it did something that you have mentioned, even in your book, you mentioned it. It appears that it turned on something. And she has developed some autoimmune issues, alopecia, Sjogren's, things like that. And so the question that she had on this is, we know that there are some adverse reactions. You've discussed that there have been a few deaths, and I think that they've figured out why.
Right.
But in this case, what are your thoughts on the proper pre-transplant immune testing that should be done on either the donor or the recipient? And that's tough to answer.
Yes. So as I stepped in understanding the microbiome, I'm noticing that obviously if you've got a donor that has a lot of Prevotella and you already have a lot of Prevotella. So the process of fecal transplant is more complex than just putting microbes, right? It's understanding what was at the baseline, what was the culprit of the problem, what was the microbes that were altered, and then, what problems did it cause in the colon? In other words, is there an overgrown growth of something on the colonic wall that is difficult that the microbes don't implant, for example, right? So there's 3-step process, right? So donor selection, first of all, microbiome analysis. I think as we get into the world of fecal transplant in the future, it's going to be microbiome analysis, right? What does your microbiome look like at baseline? What microbes are affected? Who is your donor? Is your donor a family member or a bank? And how do you do the procedure so that you can maximize implantation? And then how do you sustain implantation, right? So there's 4 different steps, and all those steps are very important and very complex in their own rights. The first one, I think, the baseline, understanding the microbiome, you have to compare with everything that you've seen, that I have seen in the database, for example. So we're not there yet, right? To have a fingerprint of what Alzheimer's looks like, Parkinson, alopecia areata, to say to a patient, look, you're taking stool donors of a patient that has a risk of having Alzheimer's in the future, or Parkinson's, because we saw some microbes in the stools that are potentially Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, right? You need to tell the risk versus benefits to the patients, right? So am I swapping C. diff for potential of having Alzheimer's? Am I swapping SIBO for potential of having alopecia areata? Those are the real risks when you think about it. Am I swapping C. diff for rheumatoid arthritis? ALS, MS, etc. So obviously that's part number 1, is that discussion with the patient, because right now we do not know. When we take stools from a donor, and so even though I would love to take my little kids' stools in me and start losing weight much faster, or eat, garbage so that I don't gain weight, unfortunately, I have to be conscientious that I could inherit something that is not matched with me and could give me something else. So until we know what we're doing, I think, in the microbiome space and what those microbes are doing, I think it's a dangerous way. Of course, if the patient is dying and he has a grandchild and his choice is, you know what, I'm going to use a grandchild, or I choose to use a donor from a fecal bank, but I know the risk because I'm dying. I have Alzheimer's, I have ALS, I have Parkinson's, I have a debilitating chronic problem or I have autism as a child. Then those kids, those parents, those people that have those debilitating conditions, I think would take the risk without knowing, right? But at the same time, we have to be careful in how we do it because it is still risky. The other day I was talking to the FDA because we were trying to approve fecal transplant for autism on 30 kids. We got approved 1 kid that we're doing already. Of course, 1 kid doesn't tell you much. If the kid doesn't respond, probably it's because he's too old. This is a kid that's 19 years old. The microbiome is already set. He's got the neurological problems from it. So, am I going to achieve success? Maybe, maybe not. If I achieve success, great. But we want to do 30 kids, right? And the FDA said to me, well, we should do placebo trial. Are you going to plan to do a placebo control trial? And I said, I'm not going to put a kid through a colonoscopy and give him placebo. I'm sorry. Yeah. I draw the line there. And that's why I think the research that's coming out on COVID is really going to be a game changer to start saying, we need to relook at this placebo control trial. We need to start saying, let's do precision medicine and let's see what's happening with the microbiome before and after. So, the beauty that we have in our lab is right now we're working on developing a validated assay verified, reproducible. We're seeing the data. We're publishing it. You know, the DDW is accepting my poster. ACG is accepting my poster. You know, you're validating my work. You know, so the data is being validated by my peers because they're seeing the data. I think we need to use that technology that was created of this assay, and we need to get insurance companies to approve it so that every doctor around the country can start understanding the microbiome, but also develop the same protocol that Dr. Barodi used, the same protocol Neil Stolman used, Colleen Kelly, Paul Fierstadt, Alex Karotz, you know, these giants that have been doing fecal transplant and have achieved 92 to 99 success in C. diff. We need to use those protocols. I think the problem is that too often people are in a rush. They want to have the solution right away. They're not willing to wait for the proper research to be done. And then they go to people that promise them an answer and they charge a lot of money. And then what happens is they end up worse than they started off with. And that's not okay, in my opinion, you know, because safety is number one. You know, all disease begins in the gut. Hippocrates said that, and I think you've heard me say that. But also do no harm came from him, right? We have to be careful. We have to be cautious with fecal transplant, with the microbiome world. And if there's a better solution, which is a microbe that's in the earth, you know, then maybe that's a better solution. You know, if we need to go back to basics.
I absolutely cannot tell you how much I love hearing the way you're describing this. First of all, the way you described why you did it is your why. You go, we have to be able to help. We have to first do no harm.
Yes.
And the way that you're describing it is almost like, well, if somebody finds a better way, I'll adapt to that. That's no big deal. I'm not this is not to start a business. This is not to,
no.
You do have a business. You do have this incredible stuff going on. But the way you're describing it is you're willing to keep an open mind, even on your own research, which is that is fantastic.
Yes. And listen, if I see that I think the FDA respects me, and I've worked with them for years. They've been in my office. They've audited me for clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies. And I think the FDA respects me because I'm the kind of person who's very transparent. If I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'll admit that I'm wrong, because that's what science is all about, right?
Yes.
If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called science. Albert Einstein said that.
Being wrong is just an opportunity to learn. I mean, it really isn't. Being wrong doesn't mean that it's over. It just simply means, oh, this isn't the correct way. Let's go a different way.
You learn more from being wrong than from being right. You learn more from the mistakes. And I think even the mistakes need to be published, because that's where you learn, well, I shouldn't be doing that.
And you doing that right now at this stage of your career sends a message to your children, which is so important. That's what I always try and talk to my kids about, and he talks to his kids, that it's okay to fail. If you're not failing, you're not trying enough.
I failed so many times, and and you learn from the failing, and you make mistakes in life, right? And you fall down to the rock bottom, and then you climb up again. And that's life. So.
All right. I need you to give some hope to a big group of people that there's a Facebook group, a closed Facebook group. It's the colonic inertia group. And one of the core members of that group emailed me and said, please tell me that she may have some data on FMT and colonic inertia. Have you had any experience with that?
So Dr. Barodi is working on an amazing protocol. He has seen some improvement with his patients. Patients are going to him. You know, in Australia, they can do fecal transplant over there. And there is hope coming into the future. So colonic inertia might be a microbiome dysbiosis as well. So let's hope.
Awesome.
Yeah. So. We already covered that. One thing about the adverse reactions, do you feel like in the future you will have a protocol when someone has an adverse reaction?
Adverse reactions from fecal transplant?
From fecal transplant. Specifically this one person that seemed to get worse after each one. Is there a way to take some
I mean, I
steps
think
back?
the first step is understanding what's in the microbiome, right? So understanding, and we say we're research, we're willing to go into the research with them. So we do give people consents and we give them stool kits, but we may not find anything. And the problem is once you break something, how hard is it to put it back together, right? So, once you damage something, can you bring it back to the same shape? And that's the hard part. You're working with trillions of bugs that have been damaged. And once you've damaged them, can you put them all back together? And is that the right method for that colon? So it's complex.
Good answer. Do you have any other questions?
I think you've pretty much addressed everything that I could possibly want to say about the microbiome. But I mean, honestly, I think it's a brilliant mechanism. I'm more intrigued by what is driving you to find these answers because it just resonates so much with what I think I've learned by working with Ken and what we've been able to find as we keep trying to find correct purpose. And like you said, sometimes incorrect purpose in what we try. And it's great. Honestly. So honestly, thank you. Thanks for really putting some meat behind what it means to analyze poop.
Well, let's talk about putting some meat behind this. So I'm part of a really big group now.
Yeah.
And Jim Weber and company and Harry Sarles and everybody that's doing research out there in my group, GI Alliance, we're up to 700. Let's back Dr. Hazan here and help her just have
Yes.
dump trucks full of poop just showing up from Dallas and from all over the country. Yeah.
Shit, yeah.
Yes, do it. In fact, it's funny because I had a GI doctor from Santa Monica, and he came to look at my lab, and he was kind of, wondering what it was all about. And then he saw my lab, and then he called his buddy, and he goes, and of course, she gave me a kit to analyze my poop. But, bring it on. I want to see from all over the world. I want to see people that live in China versus people that live in America, Chinese, Japanese. And, I want to do 23andMe of the gut. And that's really my goal.
No, it makes it.
Yes,
it makes
I need the GI doctors.
Yeah, you're individualizing medicine by knowing exactly what it is that the patient needs. And that's just, we don't do that. We say, give so-and-so X, Y, and Z milligrams of whatever. And it really just, in anesthesia, for instance, it's all done by either ideal body weight or actual body weight. There's a lot more to what somebody's going to go through than just their body weight. So, no, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, this is.
My husband always says, if you want Sabine to do anything, just give her a challenge. And I was, this was a big challenge. And for me, it was not really that hard because, I said to myself, well, eventually I'm going to be that patient. What if I have Parkinson's? Yeah. Who's going to help me? And so I better figure it out now while I'm like youngish, and figure it out for my future, right? Or what if my grandchild becomes autistic? Everything we do in life, every action leads to a reaction. And I like to think that if I do good, then goodness comes back to me. And I've been fortunate, in my life and that I have to give back. This is my way to give back. So I'm very happy to have all you guys. The Biome Squad needs more doctors. So we need all you guys. Picture, biography, we'll put you on the website.
I'm all about being in the Biome Squad, but I'm going to go ahead and recruit within my group. I'm sure please. We got doctors now and all over of many different states. Wow, Dr. Hazan, this was an amazing podcast. My honor to be the stupidest person on this Zoom call. I love doing that. You are clearly brilliant. And I want to call up the University of Florida there, it was Jacksonville? Right? Jackson Memorial, and thank that person that said that they don't take women because they did a huge service to the future of medicine. I literally am hearing this and I'm just going, we're going to analyze people's stools before we put them on a high blood pressure medicine because we may believe that maybe that interacts with it. The most rudimentary thing that happened to me was I have really bad allergies and nothing was helping. I'm Claritin D, extended release and all this stuff. Well, we were doing a little thing where I was going to do my colonoscopy wide awake and we had cameras there. We put it on YouTube. And when my partner got to my cecum, there was a totally intact tablet that I had taken like a long time before. And I'm like, well, that's why my allergies are so bad. This thing isn't even disintegrating because it's a whatever. It just went straight through.
Yes.
Yeah, extended release. Now I have better results because I bite it. So I'm like extended release my ass.
Wow. No, I know. It's the same thing. All these drugs. And then it's also, what are these drugs doing? Like, I think one of the things Neil Stolman and Colleen Kelly want to do, they had the brilliance to start the Malibu Microbiome meeting to bring all these doctors to educate themselves on the microbiome. Because as we learn things, we need to teach the doctors to bring them on. My thing was never a consumer product, or it was a research to bring the doctors, because exactly, if I teach you what I learned in the lab, then you treat your patients. You know, that's really my goal and my role. But one of the things they wanted was to bring pharma to our world to do precision medicine, to make sure that these new drugs don't affect the microbiome worse, and then to follow the microbiome of patients to make sure that, you know, the patient is fine, but then long term, because we saw from antibiotics, you give antibiotics to patients, they're fine they treated their pneumonia, but then later on it starts the chain reaction of diversity is lost now. And with loss of diversity, you know, microbes and viruses penetrate. And definitely we're going to be showing that. So once the papers are out, I'm going to be calling you and saying, let's do the podcast, because you're going to ask.
Love it.
Sure. Absolutely love it. Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Listening to everything you do, I'm going to quit complaining how busy I am. I'm just going to get back at it, because you are an absolute machine, and I love your energy. I love your honesty, and I love your why. That is fantastic.
Thank you. I think we have to ask why. And I have a chip on my shoulder. You know, it's never good enough. So I'm always like questioning. So when people challenge me, I just like keep going. So I'll show you. Watch me. Those are my two favorite words.
Well, Dr. Sabine Hazan, thank you so much for joining us on episode 58 of the Gut Check Project. Sorry, I was a little late, but completely worth the deluge of information. And I just now looked over at Ken's phone. We've been going for over an hour, and it feels like we've been talking 15 minutes. This has been incredible. Yeah.
And unfortunately, I feel like I can go another 2 hours. I've got a lot more notes, but I realize that everybody's time is valuable, and we still have to do your second podcast once you publish the paper.
Yeah.
So we'll ask those questions then.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much. We'll have ways to connect with Dr. Hazan in the show notes. And anything else, Ken?
No, that's great. Absolutely fantastic.
Thanks, Dr. Hazan. You bet.
Thank you.
One last thing. Seriously.
Oh, yes.
Get the book. Let's talk shit. It's funny. It's good. And a lot of the stuff that she talks sciencey here, she brings it to a lay level in the book. I thought it was great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
That's episode 58. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.